We don't see.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. We're live today, and thank you for joining us for today's session. It's like a first session of Bootcamp's webinar series, where we try to discuss the gap between LLMs and the business, real life and myth, which is the topic for today's session. And we'll try to answer to questions such as, why is there such a gap in terms of the cutting edge generative AI technology and what's possible in enterprise today, where people are, what are the lies, what is the truth, how can organization bridge that gap? And in order to engage in this conversation, I've got the honor to have today with me Julien Simon, who is a chief evangelist at Hugging Face. Happy to have you, Julien, with us. Matt Turk, managing director at Firstmark, and Glenn Coe, CEO of Stochastic.ai. And myself, I'm Florian Duetto, CEO of Dapatkan, and happy to be able to moderate this discussion today. For those on the audience joining us, if you have any questions during the conversation, please leave them in the Q&A submission rather than in the chat, because the chat is already actually very active. Hi from Dubai, hi from Ireland, like hello everyone. Like we've got people from all over the world joining us today. That's great. And also put it in the Q&A submission rather than in the chat, those questions, so that we can get into them during the second half of the session. And note also that a recording will be available of this session after today. But so now let's dive directly into the questions. And maybe because I introduced my everyone in the panel very, very rapidly, in order to actually learn more about you and get your sense of like how you think yourself about this fast evolving market, I'll try to ask you one question where you have to provide each of you in a row the most impressive LLM application you've seen, like for real, the biggest misconception about LLM applications that you've seen so far, second, and third, the most exciting LLM-based application that you haven't seen so far, but you've dreamed about it. Those three things in a row, each of you. So maybe we can start with Glenn, who is, I think, joining us from Boston, I guess.
Right. I'm normally based out of Boston, but I'm currently traveling for work in Seoul, Korea right now.
Thanks for joining us, given the time zone. It must be late in your day.
Yeah. So I think the most impressive LLM-based application, I think this is a great question, because I wouldn't say that I have seen anything super impressive yet. Primarily because I think people are trying to build that impressive application and they haven't gotten there yet. So simple answer is not yet, but let's hope that we're going to see some of them towards the end of the year when people have spent more time building and iterating to improve the product. But perhaps we should also move on to hear others' opinion before we get to the other questions.
Most impressive one, anyone?
Yeah, I think Glenn, I think I would agree with Glenn, which goes to show how quickly we get jaded. I think, 3-4 months ago when we saw the first LLMs in production, I think everybody's jaw dropped to the floor. I don't think anyone expected that technology to move that fast and be so, customer ready in a way. And a few months later, it's like it's been there forever. And I would agree. I'm looking forward to customers building, real life business apps with this. And I think soon we'll have I'll have a better answer to the question. Matt.
Yeah, look, I echo certainly some of this. I'm personally not jaded. I'm still, my mind is still blown on a daily basis. Look, if I have to pick one, and maybe that's sort of an obvious one, but Mid-Journey to me just like keeps just super just impressing me, and the latest features, whether that was zoom out or what was the other one called, pan, like both of which basically extend the frame of the image, or extend the image beyond the original frame. I just find that just absolutely amazing. To me, it's just like magic. So love that, love a lot of other things, but agree that we are early.
And it seems that there is some agreement here here in the panel that we are early. So I guess that apart from the fact that the market is early, that this earliness, do you have like big misconceptions about LLM that you've seen lately, like the kind of things that like where you roll your eyes, you stay silent, but like, why are people thinking about that this way?
All right, I'll go first. So number one is bigger models always perform better. So sorry, but no. This one is kind of fading away slowly, and the next one I'm facing is, and it's actually part of the discussion, I think, is I'll never need to fine tune. I can just do prompt engineering, whatever that means. So yeah.
Okay. I think we'll double click into that, I guess,
Yes.
later on. I think it's a very interesting discussion for me. Yeah.
I'll pick two. One which is sort of indirect, which is that generative AI is AI. There's been so much air cover on ChatGPT and all the things, and so many people that are kind of like new to AI, which is the beautiful thing, right? Is that it's ChatGPT has made AI mainstream, but there's so many people that jump to the conclusion that that's it, that's AI, and completely misunderstanding that actually, and Kepadaku is a perfect example of this, that AI has been deployed in the enterprise at scale in production for a very long time, delivering real ROI, and that all those use cases are just not going away. In fact, if anything else, it's just about to become much more commonplace across enterprises in general. So that's one. And two, the other misconception I'm hearing is that AI and generative AI is in the process of becoming sort of like a solved problem, almost like sort of commoditized, and that basically AI is no longer deep tech. It's just something that's available as an API, and like anybody can now use it. And which to me very much echoes the conversation in 2016, 2017 around TensorFlow. We would have people coming into our office saying, well, we're an AI company, and then you would like ask, two questions and start digging into it a little bit, and the answer would always be, oh, no, that's solved. We'll just use TensorFlow. We sort of done. And fast forward to today, I'm hearing some of the same thing, and to me, AI is still very much a deep tech approach, deep tech kind of a domain where you need people that truly understand what's happening for any of this to actually work out.
Mm. And Glenn, on your side, I guess. So Glenn,
Sure.
in my understanding, you're in the business of helping organization building models. So I guess that you must be of the opinion that fine tuning makes sense, and that building your own model is not easy.
Right. And this is quite similar to also what Julian shared, but I guess like the first thing I could talk about is when people say training the model or training the LLM. Oftentimes people actually just describe updating your RAG, the retrieval augmented generation system, as training the model when you're actually not doing anything to the model. You're just updating your databases and indexing. And that's like one thing that I saw quite often when people use the terminology training. They misuse it by describing that as the training process, which can be sort of, I guess, sort of makes sense, but not really, because you're not really doing anything to the model. I think the second thing also is just this idea that LLMs can do everything. and that LLM should be the solution for everything, which is obviously not true. This is also what we have touched upon, is like, you could actually use BERT or like some smaller models other than just using really large models for a lot of the applications. So oftentimes, like, using a big model is an overkill and waste of resources. And I think that's another misconception. And third, I think it's because third is more on the difficulty of training these models and deploying these models with the right kind of like the latency and the cost efficiency. People, because they were, a lot of the developers were exposed to GPT-3 APIs already. They're used to their level of latency, but they don't realize that getting that latency is really actually very difficult. So when people think about, the deploying the actual model for production, they're like, oh yeah, that's probably going to be simple. Whereas like that process is going to be really, really difficult. And I think that's like the last thing I want to comment on this question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So you outline lots of interesting topics like size of models, fine tuning versus not, and retrieval systems, and what else, which get me to kind of like I think a question that our audience must be wondering: what are we talking about? As in recently, some people start talking about LLM application design patterns. So is this true? Do we have design patterns for LLM? What kind of apps are we building? Is it that depending on the latency you need, the size, and so forth, you actually have different approach to it? So what have you seen so far on the market in terms of actual apps being deployed? And like, do you see already some designs or way to think about your app very high level? And I apologize for the audience because LLMs is an early market, so we keep getting very conceptual and then down to the weeds of techniques, but like, that's life, I guess. It's early stage. So maybe Julian, have you seen design patterns among your customers?
So if we mean design patterns I would say in the software engineering sense of the word, I would say no. I would say there are probably some very advanced users out there who are already standardizing the way they're working with LLMs and building apps with LLMs. But literally every customer I talk to is still experimenting and figuring things out. And in a way, I think it's 2015 all over again when deep learning started to be a thing for enterprise customers. So they're trying to understand, what models you use, whether to fine tune or not, and as Glenn mentioned, what kind of performance they can actually expect in production. So I think if you look at, let's say, maybe typically chatbot applications, yes, there are some common building blocks. You'll need obviously an LLM. You'll need some kind of search backend to put your reference documents, whether it's a vector database or whether it's just a good old search stack. So there are some common parts, but I think we're still years away from having an accepted way to build those apps, and that's fine, right? I think everything is moving so fast. Anyone claiming to have the golden standard architecture for LLM apps is probably trying to sell you a consulting project or just trying to be too fancy for their own good. So let people experiment, let them find business value, and then yes, they will make those things into actual stacks and products that can be replicated and shared across the industry.
Makes sense. And Glenn, have you seen a specific smart architecture design apps where you felt that LLMs were used in their true power?
Right. So I think a lot of the stuff that we see right now are just using the basic building blocks, like Julian had said. You have some sort of a knowledge base of some sort, and you're using LLM mostly for just somewhat paraphrasing, right, from the results from that. I think that's like quite common. But even that, when you think about looking at open source projects like LangChain or Llama Index, we talk to people. These libraries don't actually just cover all the use cases. So some of like the people that have started with these libraries have since then moved away. You know, they're like either using only small parts of it, they're using a mix of all these different parts of it. Like, I think there is no clear design pattern, even for the retrieval augmented generation application.
Super interesting. But so, would you say that there is still a basic stack, as in like a set of tools that everyone is using, and then maybe other tools that more advanced people are using? So what's this stack today from your perspective?
I think everyone definitely have tried LangChain or Llama Index as a starting point. And obviously, you know, the vector databases also, they came in and were there at the right time to absorb the new developers who were just starting to work on large language model related stuff. But I don't think there is a single tool that everyone uses. I feel like it really depends on the application. Really also depends on your preference and how you want to build things. Even us, you know, when we look at these libraries, like we had already worked on something very similar internally, that basically does the same thing as these open source libraries. So I think, and we're seeing a lot more of that with the customers as well, because everyone's going to have a, you know, slightly different stack for their own application, and I don't think the current solutions are there yet in terms of maturity.
And
yeah, like at the same time, so I agree with all of this. And look, it's a very fun moment, I think, in the ecosystem. Like, we shouldn't let the like overall confusion sort of deter us, because you know, it's like a let a thousand experiment bloom kind of moment, and it's fun, right? It's like we're all building the future together. Look, I agree with what Gillian and Glenn said, and that makes it like super hard from our perspective as investors, because you know, we are in the business of trying to figure out what the stack is going to look like in 3 years from now. Because if we wait for 3 years, then, you know, it'll be in many ways it'll be too late. So yes, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of things happening. Equally, there are certain names that are starting to emerge, and it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for a lot of the things, where, you know, if enough people agree that it's the thing, then that has a tendency to actually become the thing over time. So there is a little bit of a race to build the biggest sort of name and brand in the space pretty quickly. So certainly LangChain has done a really good job at that. It's sort of, you know, maybe that's faded a bit already, but, you know, at least a few weeks or a couple of months ago, if you wanted to sound smart in any kind of generative AI related conversation, you had to like say LangChain in the first 10 seconds. That's how people knew you were like the real thing.
LangChain. Sorry.
Yes, exactly. and then you know, like, look, Pinecone, and we're not investors there. They did a remarkable job out of all the vector databases. You know, there's Pinecone, there's Quadrant, there's Weaviate, there's Chroma, there's like a bunch of them. But like somehow Pinecone has emerged as like the name that everybody talks about. And I was interviewing the CEO for the event I run, Data-Driven NYC, a few weeks ago, and he was saying that they had, at the time, just a few weeks ago, they had like 10,000 signups a day, which is insane. So look, how many of these people actually stick? How many of those people are tourists? How many of those people, conversely, have a real project they're working on? I don't know, but it's still pretty amazing. So there is that kind of emerging stack of, you know, LLMs, and then Pinecone as a vector database, and then LangChain as the orchestration, you know, system that seems to be gelling. So we'll see what that looks like in 6 months. But as of now, it seems to be who the winners are.
And do you think that there will be a long-term market of tools, of fragmented tools around LLMs? Because another opinion could be that a few years forward, LLMs as we know them will actually change in terms of like their API and so forth. The object itself will change, making just the tools you need different. Because yeah, the LLMs we manipulate today are pretty basics in terms of API, essentially. So the market of tools moving forward could actually be also very different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think this is going to be like horizontal layers of tooling where, regardless of what happens to the models, that platform will be what customers use to just manage the complexity. Look, I mean, not to be rah-rah Dataiku, but I think Dataiku is one of the platforms that has a wonderful example to be that. So, you know, regardless of whether OpenAI or whatever, Core Depth or you know, Claude or like any of those things or change, or whether that's ended up being LangChain or LM Index or somebody else, I think customers, enterprise customers, will need a sort of horizontal platform where you'll be able to take all those blocks and plug them in or plug them out, depending on what you need. So yes, I do think for enterprises there's going to be a need for a tooling platform to orchestrate and have everything work in a sort of coherent manner.
So earlier in the conversation, one of you, or actually multiple people, mentioned the question of the topic of fine-tuning, as in like, should you fine-tune, never fine-tune, always fine-tune, prompt versus fine-tuning. So I think we have the ultimate question. When should you fine-tune? When should you just do prompt engineering? When you should just like put lots of context to the model? Like, how should people know that? How do you decide? Like, what is the answer?
I fired the first volley, so I'll start. I think first maybe we need to explain, you know, what those two things are and what to expect from them, right? Because they're really different. So, in my opinion, and you know, hopefully Glenn and Matt will disagree and and add more color, but in my opinion, fine-tuning is about teaching the model the specifics of your domain, you know, the fundamental, what makes your document truly unique and different. And prompting is really about the form, right? So it's about this is how I'd like you to answer the question. So if you experiment with a model and you find that the answers are lacking, you know, depth or relevance, or they're just plain hallucinations, then it means the model simply doesn't know much about the question you're asking, and it just doesn't have any depth on your particular domain. So the best way to fix this is to train the model on more of your data, and that's fine-tuning, right? Now, if the answers are okay, relevant, and I guess, you know, good enough, but you don't like the way the data is output, right? Is it too verbose? Is it too short? Is it too technical? Is it not enough, you know, not technical enough? If you don't like the form, then prompting can help you fix that. So most of the customers I work with eventually do both, but I would advise that first you start with the vanilla models and figure out what doesn't really work. Is it the depth and the quality of the generated data, or is it just the form of that data? And then act accordingly. But generally, you know, passing 16K of context, hoping that it will magically teach your model about a domain it doesn't know anything about, is likely to be disappointing, and it hurts latency a lot, as customers quickly find. You know, they see those 15-20 seconds on ChatGPT, and they say, we'll never be able to use that in prod, and then they're, you know, dumbfounded. So you know, I think it's you have to do things in the right order, evaluate, figure out whether to fine-tune or prompt, and probably eventually do both. But okay, that's just me. Glenn and Matt, what do you think? Oh, Glenn, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was saying that I agree with you. I think if you want to build the best solution out there, you're gonna have to do fine tuning. I think yes, there are certain applications where fine tuning may not be that important. If you're just using LLM for, again, like in rags, where you just have to take the text, the original text, and somehow formulate it into an answer, I think sure. But again, you know, if you want to reduce hallucination and also add some domain-specific context or content, you're gonna have to do fine-tuning. I like to think of it as like, you know, ChatGPT or like these vanilla generalized models as a smart college student who has taken all these gen ed classes, knows history, math, science, great, but can it actually write essays on chemistry better than a chemist? No. And I think that process of teaching this model to learn chemistry and really become an expert in chemistry, I think that's like what fine tuning brings. So when you look at the generation, and if you're generating large amount of text on a specific topic, oftentimes, like without fine tuning, your generated text is not going to have that domain expertise, which would then give you the lacking answers, as Julian has said. So I think if you want to build the best thing, you have to do both. But when you start out, prompt engineering is obviously much less of an effort than doing fine tuning. And then, because when you do fine tuning, that means you're most likely working with an open source model, which means that you have to think about how to deploy it, how do you scale it when you go from like 1 users to thousands of users. So that brings another like whole new world of complexity that people have probably less experience with if they are just starting to build LLM applications.
Makes sense. So if you want to do real chemistry, you need to fine tune, to simplify. But then the immediate next question is like, how much does it cost? Like what kind of skills do you need to fine tune today? How much does it cost? So to think about this this cost factor from the perspective of the audience, what are the order of magnitude in terms of build and run when you're thinking about fine tuning?
So a lot of folks obsess over training costs, and I see why, right? I mean, we trained, you know, the Bloom model last year. It's an open source alternative to GPT-3, so it's, you know, 176 billion parameters. It's a large model. Public price on a cloud, on a, you know, list price on the public cloud right now would be maybe, you know, $3-4 million, but that's initial training, right? Fine tuning is, you know, I would say 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than that, right? You're looking at, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for such a large model, much less for smaller models, which obviously we advocate for. But the bigger problem, you know, I guess the elephant in the room is that it's not about the training, it's about the inference, because most companies will maybe fine tune a bit, right? $2,000 doing that, and then they'll deploy the model in production 24/7. And as Glenn said, they'll scale it according to users and traffic. And so over time, inference cost is the killer. And that's why we advocate for smaller models, because smaller models mean you know, less infrastructure, better latency, more throughput, and generally you know, generally better cost performance. So it's you know, it's not about the training. You know, most of us out there will never train that multi-million-dollar. Will maybe fine tune for a few thousands, but then comes inference and inference optimization, and over time, like I said, this can be very expensive. So be careful there. Glenn, I'm sure you have some experience with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you look at the cost of inference, people actually say that the total cost of the training, when you look at the breakdown of the total cost of deploying models and also training models, training is in fact only a small fraction of the total cost, whereas like the inference is supposed to be 70% to 90% of the actual cost in building a product and launching an application. So most people had been talking about training, I think primarily because the figure is so large, right? Oh, millions of dollars required to train. But then you see all these open source models that are also coming out really, with good performance. And now there's a lot of examples of fine-tuned models that perform really great. And there are a lot of resource efficient fine-tuning techniques that uses either like things like low rank approximation or adapters. And there's also like low precision methods like int 8 and 4. We just released the int 2 as well. So we're going to have like the fine-tuning cost go down further and further. Now the question is, what about the inference? And I think that's what people should also think about when they build an application, because inference, you're most likely going to keep this on 24/7. Fine-tuning, you could do it like once a month, you could do it once a year, or like
exactly.
This is less frequent. But inference is going to eat away your cost, it just eat into your your budget, because you have to keep it on all the time. And now, like if you think about the latency, you might want to deploy it using the fastest GPUs, and fastest GPUs obviously are really expensive and also like hard to get as well. So there's going to be a lot of challenge related to inference. But I think most of the new developers who have started building haven't gotten there yet, where they need to scale, because they're just still working on the product and getting it to work well. But I think people should think more carefully about what would be the actual cost if you train these models, if you fine-tune these models and put it into production.
Yeah. So just as a reminder for our audience, the goal of this webinar is not to scare people when they want to do LLM, but actually to incentivize them. But still, talking about pricing, back to Matt, I think you must be seeing lots of startups coming your way, talking about AI and LLM powered. And I think there is an history of companies relying on third-party APIs and then being squeezed in terms of cost and pricing during their initial journey. So, how do you think about that, or how do you advise the startups you see and the companies in terms of those consideration of the price of LLMs, and especially when they are using APIs instead of LLMs they control?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and for people like us that care a lot about what the economics of the startups are going to look like, it's also a time of uncertainty. I was joking the other day that generative AI investing is a process by which venture capitalists transfer large amounts of money to NVIDIA through intermediaries known as startups. So that there's a little bit of that, and the kind of cost that Julien was mentioning in the chat, of like 30K to 60K a month, like we're starting to see some of this a little bit, and it's a real question. It's a question for startups. It's a question for Google as well, right? Like a Google search versus a generative AI powered Google search. That's entirely different economics. And is Google still going to be the money printing machine it's been over the last couple of decades in a world where search becomes a generative AI effort? Is unclear. So we're all trying to figure it out in real time. More specifically to your question about third-party API dependency, by all means, we're starting to. I think there's a general consensus to the extent that it matters, but like in the VC world, around the fact that if you build a company entirely on top of GPT-4, it's a terrible idea. You're not going to build any kind of long-term defensibility. You can certainly, build a company that's going to generate cash in the short term, and that's a great thing to do. But that's probably not a venture backable kind of company. There's already rumors that Jasper, which was sort of the poster child of those thin layers on top of OpenAI, had like a crazy ramp in terms of ARR, and I forget what the numbers were, but like people were saying like over 100 million ARR. I don't have any actual specific information, but like the rumors is that they just completely dropped since, and that's in part because ChatGPT itself became better, in part because a lot of competitors emerged overnight. So I think to build a real AI company, AI first company that has long-term defensibility, you're going to need to build a lot more on top of those APIs for as a point number one. And then point number two, I think any entrepreneur would be well served thinking in terms of future-proofing their company and build a system where you can call different APIs based on needs and perhaps anticipated quality of the result and perhaps anticipated cost of query. And when I was talking to your other question about having horizontal layers of tooling that enable companies to do that, I think that's a prime example. Like, oh, for this query, I definitely want GPT-4. For this query, I want Claude. For this query, I want my internal, LLM that I pulled off Hugging Face and fine tune and sort of like routing. So I think that's the short-term future we are starting to see emerge.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's there's too much focus on the models and not enough on what it is we're actually trying to achieve, with the application logic and the business problem we're trying to solve. And I keep telling customers, don't fall in love with the models. They're expandable, replaceable,
And they are not people also too. Yeah.
Except Claude.
Yeah. No. I mean, all of them. And so the experiment with the best models today. But I shared our LLM leaderboard in the chat, and look at it now. Take a screenshot and look at it a month from now, and see how much it has changed. So that's really, that's really the reality right now, and it's gonna last for a while. So just use what makes sense now and keep evaluating. And when you find better ROI with another model, then get ready to switch. And don't fall in love with the models. It's I think it's a big mistake you could make. And I totally agree with Matt. Build something more on top of just the API, because otherwise, to quote our friends at Google, you have no moat.
You have no moat. So talking about moats, I think this world of LLMs also opens up to debates about open source versus commercial. And I'm very happy about it because it's been a while. Meaning it has been a few years I was not actually able to get into open source versus commercial kind of debate that much.
Yes.
So that's a great opportunity. And
it's Windows versus Linux all over again. I feel I feel 30 years younger. So thank you.
Every 10 years. You also like the database fight back.
Yeah. MySQL versus those guys in Redwood City.
Yeah.
That shall remain nameless.
Yeah. Indeed. And so maybe to start with open source, again to you, Julien, I think that Hugging Face is kind of like the face of the open source Gen AI community. But also all of the closed source models have captivated the audience, the consumer audience through a very nice user-friendly interface. So what do you think will be happening? Do open source models need to provide the same level of quality and capability to compete on the end user market? Or what do you think are the advantages of open source today, short-term and long-term versus closed source models?
I think Matt mentioned earlier, search oriented models, and that's honestly a fight for Google and Microsoft, and honestly I don't think anyone else. So don't think that those models could be remotely applicable to what you're doing today. It's a battle for web scale search. Let them have it. I'm not interested. So when it comes to LLMs for business and enterprise use cases, I think there's room for everybody, and as much as people people would like me to throw mud at commercial models. We have hundreds of Google models on the hub. We have hundreds of Microsoft models on the hub. We have hundreds of Meta models on the hub. So those companies invest in research. They certainly spend on infrastructure. And for some of their very competitive business use cases, they decide to keep the models closed. I mean, that's okay. I guess I would do the same if I was in their shoes. But I think it's also important that they keep contributing to advancing the state of the art by releasing, papers and code and models. And that's the situation today. So I think 6 months from now, there was maybe a doubt that open source models could, even compete with the closed models. And now, I think the tables are turning. And again, I was making fun of that leaked Google document, but it looks like some of those players are starting to worry that they cannot keep up with the open source models, and that at least, again, excluding search, they're going to have a hard time justifying a premium on their models when you have so many amazing open source models coming up every day. So I think it's it's a fight. It will last forever. Some companies will prefer to use closed models and APIs because it's simpler for them, or they get better time to market, or the use case is simple enough that the closed model works well for them, and that's totally okay. That's totally okay. Again, it's not black and white, but for privacy and intellectual property and cost optimization reasons and flexibility reasons, a lot of customers are more interested and more successful with open source models. So it's not us versus them. It's not black and white. It's for customers to decide. Competition is welcome. The only thing I want to say here to all the good folks listening is, do the homework and don't listen to marketing and PR too much. Experiment on your data, factor in privacy and cost and compliance and all that good stuff, and you'll find that open source can be a very, very interesting option for you.
And Glenn, turning to you, I think that stochastics.ai offers domain-specific models in finance, among others, or ability to for your customers to build it themselves. So do you see the market moving towards more domain-specific models? How do you think this will play out in terms of domain-specific versus generalized models in the long term?
Yeah, so I think the market would move towards more domain-specific models, primarily because due to all of the reasons that we mentioned. When you think about building a product, you need to think about the balance of the performance, latency, and cost. And that really depends on what application you're building. Obviously, there are certain applications where latency may not be important. If you just need to run this, batch job once a day or like once a week, and you don't need the results immediately, sure, you could actually not care about the latency. That means that you could do better with the other two things, the performance and the cost. But I think you really have to think about how you can achieve those things. And domain-specific models give you the opportunity to not only have that performance, but also do it in a very efficient way. Instead of having 100+ billion parameter to do a summarization of, let's say, a research paper, let's say on archive, right? For example, and that if you want to create a summary of a specific length, do you really need to use, GPT-4 to continuously do it? Or can you go with some smaller model, fine-tuned specifically for summarization, and also maybe you add some more domain-specific knowledge. So maybe if you're looking at biomedical papers, then you fine-tune it using biomedical data, and then it would actually generate much better summaries at a lower latency and a cheaper cost. So I think we're going to see a whole lot of that. And we talked about Jasper as well, and many of the companies that have started building with GPT-3 APIs starting like 2 years ago when they were given the access, then a lot of them go through this period of transitioning away from just using the generalized model, because they also think about, oh, like there is maybe a missing performance with the generalized stuff. So then they would have to either look for different APIs, like whether they use Anthropic or like some other APIs, to see if the different APIs could provide that missing performance, or you would have to fine tune these models on maybe some domain specific data to be able to get that missing performance. And I think we saw a lot of companies go through that transition. So I think you have to think about your eventual goal, where you're going to be, and think about how you plan to also not only depend on a single model and single API, but think about how you can maybe use these different APIs or different open source models to do the job.
Thanks a lot. And maybe to Matt, in terms of this open source versus closed source and economics, there are some people comparing the AI ecosystem to the mobile ecosystem back in the day. And well, in retrospect, I think that Android captured lots of market share in terms of open source, but lots of the value was actually captured by a closed source system dear to my heart, actually, too, Apple. And so what do you think it will be in terms for the AI space? Like, and does it inform the way you think about investments and startups and all of that good stuff?
Yeah. Look, not to dissimilate to what Julien said. I mean, like my vision of the future is like a polyglot kind of future, where you're gonna have lots of different things. So just the way you currently have a bunch of SaaS companies which are very successful, and some sort of open source kind of like infrastructure companies and products that are very successful. I think that's going to be the same. You're going to have great companies focused on specific problems for fintech and healthcare, and those, in my opinion, are going to be like closed source SaaS kind of things, where basically they're going to be like full stack. They all the stuff that we talked about is going to be hidden, and what will matter in the end is the value that they actually deliver to customers. Which, by the way, in every hype cycle. And that's my third hype cycle since I joined Firstmark 10 years ago around AI. But every hype cycle is always the same thing. That's like a phase where people get super excited, a little over their skis, and where you look at the young startups websites and it says AI everywhere. And then towards the middle of the cycle, people start asking, okay, well, what is it for? And what problem do you actually solve? And then towards the end of the cycle, it's all about the business problem, and you see those young startups website language change from AI to we solve this problem, and AI is not even mentioned. So I think for the SaaS part of the world, you're going to have a lot of that. So companies that solve a specific problem and happen to use generative AI, but all the complexity about what happens under the hood or behind the scenes will be hidden. And then you'll have open source. And I think for infrastructure in general, I tend to be a big fan of open source. I think open source eventually wins. It's just too strong of a model around, community and transparency for like any kind of closed alternative to really succeed. And generative AI comes from open source. Its roots are very much open source. The reason why we're having this conversation in the first place is because Google decided to open source their effort around transformers as opposed to keeping it. And I think open source on the infrastructure side tends to will succeed, will prevail, I think.
So switching now to some of the questions asked by the audience, and maybe the first one asked by Anonymous. Was does your thoughts about a common framework for formally evaluating the quality of inferences produced by LLMs, and how does one demonstrate accuracy to stakeholders? Like, how do I convince my boss that my LLM is not doing crazy things?
So coming back to something I shared on the chat earlier, this is obviously the top issue right now. So one way would be, have a lot of human eyes looking at generated outputs and scoring them, but that's boring, and of course if you need to do it every time you fine tune the model again, it's not scalable. So there are some benchmarks out there. We use them on our LLM leaderboard. They're put together by Eleuther AI, and they seem to be the kind of the standard for now. And they're interesting because they provide zero shot and few shot and many shot benchmarks. So depending on what you're trying to do, you can get different results. So that's a good place to start. But as always, I would obviously recommend that you collect some questions from your domain experts and generate some answers and circulate them and get some feedback on them. And that's all, by the way, that's also a great way to start building your own data set, right? If you want to fine tune on your own custom prompts and answers for chemical engineering or genetics or genomics or whatever, you're going to need that. So I think it's a mix of looking at benchmarks to get a sense of how well the model performs on I would say on general purpose language, and then running your own tests on your own custom domain and prompts. And I think that's part of having humans in the loop in machine learning, which has always been important and will be even more important for Gen AI.
Yeah, the more you talk about it, the more it feels like teaching and homework, but that's fine.
Yeah, it is.
And other question coming from Jose Gutierrez. Based on your experience, what is the best way to address and solve IP issues in generative AI? That's a good one for everyone generating code, but not only, I guess. Anyone with insights there?
Yeah, like, no particular insight other than the fact that I think that's going to be I think there's going to be like a big wave and a big backlash against all the models that are trained on non-copyrighted, sort of IP clean kind of data. I think that's just starting. You saw OpenAI getting sued now left and right, and so I think we're in this like Wild West kind of phase now, where rightly so, yeah, people should be left free to experiment, and I think that was very interesting. But now that the thing is becoming really serious, really fast, I think people are starting to care a lot, and a lot of the startups that don't think about this too much are going to be forced to think about it soon. So I think the short to medium term future is providers of clean data and as my computer shuts down, sorry. So providers of clean data will start licensing the data to trainers of models, and anybody not doing that, I think that's going to be a much more risky value proposition from a legal standpoint.
So you need some data laundering in order to actually produce clean data, so that then you can train model.
That's a business.
That's a business.
Yeah, and we can never understate the importance of high quality data. Right. So I said, don't fall in love with the models, but please do fall in love with your data and take good care of it. It will last forever, right? If you're in healthcare, data from 50 years ago would still be valid today. And if you're in finance, data from maybe 30 years ago is still valid and will still be valid 30 years from now. So it's all about, I think people are learning that. They're learning that they can get amazing results with smaller models, provided that they train them on high quality data. And that means curated, obviously removing the offensive stuff, the insanity in public internet data sets. And deduplicating the data is also extremely important. It's not discussed very often, but it goes a long way into increasing the quality of the model. And generally that's where you should focus your efforts. So I think the most critical skill for now in LLMs is not prompt engineering, is really data engineering and cleaning and preparing high quality data sets. That's, if you want to spend more on something, that's the thing to me.
So maybe to finish with the last question from the audience before concluding, the one most voted today is from Margaret, who is asking, who pays for it? Who pays for the compute power behind those LLMs? And I guess now also who will pay for the data and the clean data needed to actually compute, to actually build those models? How does the business model work? Feels like
VCs do.
Yeah, people. This is money. That's the answer from Matt. VCs are paying for it. Okay, that's one answer.
Well, I think if you're talking about closed models, well, I guess they have a business model, right? Given the cost of running ChatGPT at scale, somebody somewhere must be spending money, or and making money. If not, it's going to be interesting looking at earnings in a few quarters. When it comes to working with open source models, it's the customer pays for their training and fine tuning and inference costs. And again, that brings me to my obsession, which is, what's the business use case for all of this? What are you trying to do? Because experimenting without a clear goal, without a clear business metric, without clear ROI, is just going to be burning money and making cloud providers and chip vendors richer than they need to be, and more importantly, it'll be a disappointing project. So what does success look like from a business perspective, and what's the smallest possible model that gets the job done in the most cost-effective way, I think is a good way to answer the question on who's paying and how do I pay less.
Thanks. Well, actually, Julien, you gave me the perfect transition to tell to the audience that the next session in this series will be actually about talking about business use cases, scenarios where you actually make money.
I will watch that.
Believe it or not.
Yes.
And maybe to conclude, I think the audience has also lots of questions left unanswered and would like to learn more about you and everything you publish or produce about this topic. So maybe we could use the last few minutes in order for each of you actually to tell what's the best way to contact you or to read what you're doing and what you're publishing.
Sure. Okay, I'll go first. So I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn and everywhere. I mean, I'm pretty easy to find. I have a blog on Medium. I have a YouTube channel. So feel free to reach out. And if your company, if your organization wants to get to production quickly with minimal problems, minimal fuss, answering all those questions and more, we have a program called the Expert Acceleration Program, which goes from, I would say, simple consulting all the way to professional services where we can actually train models for you. And so just get in touch, ping me. I'll connect you with the right people inside of Hugging Face, and we'll take it from there. And I want to take the final words. Thank you, Florent, and for inviting me. It's a pleasure, and thanks to everybody who organized this. And Glenn and Matt, happy to chat with you. I hope we can meet in person at some point.
Sorry, I just dropped in the chat all sort of different things: blog, Twitter, podcast, YouTube channel. So you'll be exposed to a steady flow of corny jokes and not so helpful insights. But I echo Julien, thanks very much. Lovely talking with you all, and the quality of the questions in the chat was super great as well. So
yes,
congratulations on convening a really good group.
Yeah, you guys can, if you guys are interested, you can reach out to me via Twitter. We have a blog that we also on our website. You can also find me in the Discord channel that we have. It's also one of the fastest way to reach me if you have very specific questions. And LinkedIn is also another place where you could reach out to me as well. I've shared these links in the chat. I will share the Discord link as well. But give me 1 second. But yeah, thanks for inviting me to join this panel. It was a lot of fun chatting with you guys. I do hope to see you guys in person. So let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all. Thank you for making it. Thanks for the audience for the very insightful questions and also jokes on the chat. I think it was a very pleasant session from my perspective. And thanks to the 3 panelists today. Thank you, Matt, Julien, and Glenn, to make it today.
thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.